Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners, and today's video is not going to be your normal, plain Jane, boring, monotone, hey, here's my top 12 wide receiver video. Nope. Today we're going behind the science, behind the numbers. What does it take to be a top 12 wide receivers, and what wide receivers currently have the best shot at being wide receiver one? So at the end, we're going to talk about some rankings, but I want you all to understand what actually needs to be done to get to that level. Now, I don't have a draft guide to give away because my last video hasn't quite hit the like goal yet, but maybe it will with that Nick Chubb jersey we're giving away. But you need to go get yours. If you've got a draft coming up still and you have not yet got your draft guide, head over to thefantasyheadliners.com. So much information, over 600 pages, exclusive content you can't get anywhere else. And you know what? If this video hits 1,500 likes, I'm going to give one away. And if you're one that bought one, well, guess what? We'll refund you your money if you end up winning. But hey, go get your draft guide right now. If you haven't drafted yet, I'm sure your draft is coming up soon. You need to prepare and be ready to roll. So as I mentioned, I want to go behind the numbers and I want to take a look at what actually makes a wide receiver one. How do you become a wide receiver one? Well, I decided to go back 3 years, taking a look at the numbers from 2021, 2020, and 2019, respectively, and understanding what is the average numbers for wide receivers that finished as a wide receiver one. Well, back in 2019, the average numbers were 140 targets, 93 receptions, 1,248 receiving yards, and 8 touchdowns. So for everybody that finished as a wide receiver one in 2019, their average statistics came out to 140, 93, 1,248, and 8 touchdowns. Now, this is no joke, ladies and gentlemen, and this is how you know the science is really working. Because the receptions and the receiving yards for 2020 were exactly the same. 134 targets, so just down a little bit, but receptions stayed the same at 93. The yards stayed the same at 1,248, but the receiving touchdowns did bump up a little bit to 10 receiving touchdowns. Now on to 2021. The numbers took a little bit of a jump here now. 147 targets, up from the 2 previous years. 98 receptions, up from the 2 previous years. 1,315 receiving yards and 10 receiving touchdowns. So again, those were the numbers from 2019 to 2021 of wide receivers that finished at the top 12 of that position. So the average wide receiver one season over the last 3 years is 140 targets, 94 receptions, 1,270 receiving yards, and 9 touchdowns. Well, that's great, right? But what does it mean in terms of fantasy points? Because a lot of you right now might be watching this and saying, Kyle, I understand the numbers, the stats here, but what does that mean in terms of fantasy points? Because isn't that what we're really measuring? Well, hey, I've got you there. And I also wanted to do a little bit extra. And because we're talking about guys that could be wide receiver ones, why don't we include the wide receivers that are just outside that territory? So, in terms of numbers, what are the average wide receiver one points for 1 through 4, 5 through 8, 9 through 12, and then on the fringe of 13 through 16? Because let's face it, not every wide receiver one is exactly the same. And you're going to understand here in a moment why that is the case. Well, over the last 3 years, we've seen wide receiver 1 through 4 numbers jump from 245 up to 288 in 2021. Over a 20-point difference, the wide receiver 1 through 4 are scoring from 2 years ago. That is a pretty major difference. In fact, the wide receiver 5 through 8 is also in that same area. You're looking at having only 213 fantasy points for wide receivers 5 through 8 back in 2019, all the way up to 231 points this past season. Now, the fringe wide receivers, the ones at the bottom, we take a little bit of a turn here, actually, because back in 2019, it was 204 points. Then it went up to 213, and last year fell to 197 fantasy points for wide receivers 9 through 12. And when you take a look at those fringe guys, also a little bit of a drop there. A little bit of a bump from 19 to 20, and then a drop from 20 to 21. That's pretty interesting to see that the best wide receivers in the league are getting better. The very top of their position are putting up even bigger stats than ever. But when you take a look at those fringe guys, those guys that are wide receiver 9 through 12, wide receiver 13 through 16, there's a pretty significant drop off. Now, not a big enough drop off to overreact to it or anything like that. And some of you might be thinking, well, Kyle, if there's such a large drop off, then why wouldn't we want to go with a top wide receiver earlier and not a running back? And I think that is a very, very fair point, and a point for another video. But let me say this, the scarcity of the position, the drop off at running back is even worse at times. And guess what? We'll have a video coming about that as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. So from 2019 to 2021, the average wide receiver 1 through wide receiver 4 scored 268.45 points. The average wide receiver 5 through 8 scored 223.73 points. The average wide receiver 9 through 12 scored 205.15, and the average wide receiver 13 through 16 scored 191.45 points. Well, who are some of the guys this year that fit these criterias? Well, to help me with the rest of this video, I went over to our friends at Run the Sims. Pat Mayo, Justin Simmons, both of these guys excellent at what they do. And their projection tool on Run the Sims, absolutely love it. If you're a member here, you've seen me utilize it in members-only videos. But if you're not a member, you haven't seen it yet. But I use their website a lot to manipulate projections and say, okay, this is what the target share may or may not be. But they have their own projections out and things of that nature. And I like to take a look at them because they're very good at what they do, and they are some of the projections that I would trust most in the industry. So who fits the criteria? That's first what I wanted to see. So over at Run the Sims, I wanted to see who fits that wide receiver 1 criteria that we talked about a few minutes ago in the video. 140 targets, 94 receptions, 1,270 receiving yards, and 9 touchdowns. The average wide receiver 1 season over the last 3 years. There was only 2 guys by their projections that actually fit every single one of those categories, and that was Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson. I don't think there's any mistake there. And let me be honest with you. If you want to draft Justin Jefferson over Cooper Kupp this year, go for it. If you want to draft Cooper Kupp over Justin Jefferson, go for it. They're literally 1A, 1B for me. I might have Kupp at 1 and Justin Jefferson at 2, but Justin Jefferson could easily be number 1 as well. Both of them have tremendous years coming up for sure. But what about the rest of the guys? Well, nobody else fit every single one of these categories. In fact, there was only a few more, 7 to be precise, wide receivers that fit some of the criteria. Jamar Chase fit everything except the touchdowns. They had him for just under 9 touchdowns this season. Stephon Diggs fit everything except the yards. CeeDee Lamb, everything except the touchdowns. T. Higgins was actually missing in targets, receptions, and touchdowns, but was there in receiving yards. Devontae Adams was missing in touchdowns. Keenan Allen was missing in yards. And DJ Moore was missing in receptions, yards, and touchdowns. Every other wide receiver they had projected didn't even fit one of these categories. So 9 wide receivers, based on those projections, fit wide receiver 1 category this season. So these are the top guys based on those numbers. Now, I will say this. There was some guys that their numbers projected a little bit higher than some of the guys you see here, but they may have missed on all these categories, but we're very close. And you're probably wondering about Jamar Chase. Like, how does he take such a drop? Well, they've got a pretty large increase for T. Higgins this year in touchdowns. And I think that basically what they're saying is, hey, great season by Jamar Chase last year, but T. Higgins is going to be a force this season. Let's continue with who fits the criteria. Now, let's talk about fantasy points, though. So let's talk about, based on those projections, from Run the Sims, who are the guys that fit the point projections that we see here? Well, based on the point projections of 268.45 fantasy points, which is the average wide receiver 1 through 4 over the last 3 seasons, Cooper Kupp is the only player projected to score more than 268.45 fantasy points. He's the only one. Okay? So when you take a look at the guys from wide receiver 5 through 8, now this category included anybody that would score between 223 to 268. So there could be a couple of guys here that were very close, and those guys were Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Stephon Diggs. They were very close to that 268 mark, but they kind of fell right below it in the wide receiver 5 through 8 category. Then Diggs, Lamb, Higgins, Adams, Samuel, and Tyreek Hill were all projected to score more than 223.73 fantasy points. Now moving on to wide receiver 9 through 12. What do we see there? Mike Evans and Keenan Allen. Those are the two guys scheduled to score between two, or projected to score more than 205.15, but less than 223.73. And then those fringe guys that could be right on the end of it. Michael Pittman, DJ Moore, Mike Williams, Gabe Davis, Jalen Waddle, and Courtland Sutton. All of them were projected to score more than 191, but less than 205.15. Now, I want everyone to be absolutely aware of what I am trying to do with this video. This is not my actual rankings. This is helping you understand what does it take for someone to actually fall into one of these categories. And it's also to help you understand that ranking wide receivers is incredibly difficult. Ranking wide receivers, it's very hit or miss, because in a members only video that I did yesterday, and again, if you're a member out there, you've seen it and you already know what I'm talking about, unless you haven't watched it yet, and if you haven't, go watch it. But I used Run the Sims to manipulate some of their projections and to show, okay, what if this wide receiver gets a little bit less yards per catch? Or what if he has a few less receptions per year? And honestly, the difference between being a high-end wide receiver 2 and a low-end wide receiver 2 could literally be a couple of hundred yards. It could be 200 yards. And over the course of a 17-game season, when you talk about like a per game statistic, that's not a whole lot. That's only 11 extra yards per game. For you to have 200 extra yards in a season, that's only 11 extra yards per game. If you catch 5 balls in a game, that's literally you falling forward a few extra times instead of falling right where you were at. Okay, it's like people say in baseball, like for you to hit 400 in a season, which hasn't been done in a very long time, for you to hit 400 in a season, you have to get very lucky. You have to have, an extra ball land somewhere. For you to be a Hall of Famer, to have a 300 average, that's literally like 3 extra balls a season that just need to land in a certain area or just be out of an outstretched fielder's arms. It's basically the same way here. It's the same exact concept. These wide receivers, when you talk about the little difference in them being wide receiver 1s and wide receiver 2s, could be 11 yards a game. That's it. So to project these guys out, it is becoming increasingly difficult with this being such a pass-heavy league, because now you got guys vying for targets, wide receiver 3s and even wide receiver 4s that literally we never would have thought of several years ago. And now they've made their way into the criteria of being guys that we need to consider as fantasy viable. And it's becoming more and more difficult to rank guys and say, hey, this is what we have. This is who we're going with. But these next 12 guys, I really like them as well, and they could easily fall into the top 12. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea today. If you were to rank your own wide receivers, if you were to literally sit down with your own list and say, this is what I want to do, it would help you understand how you would need to potentially order some wide receivers to make sure that you are actually getting guys that can meet certain criteria. Members only videos right now include our rankings as an extra perk for them. For all of you asking out there, yes, week 1 rankings will be back next week, because we are in the last full week without regular season football this year. So weekly rankings, those will be back for the general public next week. Everybody can view them. But for right now, our off-season rankings, our preseason rankings, they're members only videos. So I would encourage you, become a member today if you're willing and able. The smallest tier, it's $4.99 a month. Literally, it's one less coffee per month from Starbucks. Unless you're getting like a venti, then you're fine. Just get a small next time and you can cover it. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get out of here for the day. Appreciate everybody checking out this video. Hit the like button for me. 1,500 likes. I'm going to give away a draft guide. Subscribe if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners. And in the comments down below, let me know, who is your dark horse to be a wide receiver one this season? Have a great one, ladies and gentlemen. Peace out. Stay safe. Stay healthy. And I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.
Analytics off the chain, other channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game. Y'all stuck on third down. Your content's plain Jane. Headliners on top now. We gonna move and change. Podcast off the rip. Draft guide, so legit. Fantasy world, our game tight. You know we about that chub life. Stuck in a rut and you need some motivation. Head to the channel for this Headliner Nation. I'm a headliner.